I was skeptical the Russians would invade. I thought it was Hollywood-style approaches to take Kyiv. Even before the war, I was looking at these reports, and I could not find any from any sources other than Russian generals. A lot of Russia's strategy geopolitically has always been, I think, going to be catastrophic for the Russians. I think the people of Ukraine, they're ready to lead the free world.
Which scenarios do you have in your head how this brutal Russian invasion is going to finish?
I mean, real peace until three things happen.
Hello, my name is Yulia Mendel. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and we're talking today in the KyivPost to Andy Bain, head of Ukrainian Freedom Fund. Andy, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Julia.
Actually, thank you not for being in the KyivPost, but for being in Ukraine these days. I wonder, how long have you been in Ukraine, and what do you do here?
Well, I've been in Ukraine, as far as the war concerned, I've been here the whole time, but I got here in '92. I came here in 1992. And I've been here mostly ever since, doing business. In 2003, I was in the reserves, in the Marine Reserves, was activated and went to Iraq. A friend of mine was the assigned liaison to the Ukrainian battalion, and I switched with him because all he could say was "Das Vidanya Tavarich." So I decided they needed more than that, and I became liaison to the Ukrainian battalion in Iraq. Served with them and made good friends working with them, and stayed in touch up until present. But then during when Maidan happened, I met with them to see if they'd actually fight the Russians at the time. They were eager to fight the Russians. They just had been so raped by Yanukovych's regime, the gas gone, that they didn't have batteries for their trucks. So I had my company buy truck batteries for their battalion. And they mobilized overnight. And based on that, and meeting with American businessmen who were interested in helping, we set up the Ukrainian Freedom Fund to help bring equipment to the Ukrainian troops.
Does it function these days when the large-scale war started in February?
Yeah, it actually, I was skeptical the Russians would invade. I thought it was very stupid for Putin to invade. I was wrong. He obviously did invade, but I was right that it was a very stupid thing, and it's proving, I think, going to be catastrophic for the Russians. But the morning the war started, I was here in Kyiv, and I sent out, thinking the internet would go down, I sent out a flurry of emails, and we restarted the Freedom Fund, and I had some people in the U.S. ready to help. And so we've relaunched it. We've raised now almost $1 million in buying equipment, and we're getting it to key units and helping mostly promote volunteerism. I think part of Ukraine's strength is the number of volunteers they have, and the fact that all the troops at the front are supported by family and friends. And to be honest, you know better than I do that Ukraine's procurement and logistics systems are not necessarily the best in the world. And so having the volunteerism is critical to getting the key gear to the troops that need it the most. And were it not for the volunteers, I think it'd be a very different war. And so Freedom Fund provides that equipment as one group that does it, but we want to stress the need for other volunteers and to promote volunteerism across the country and across the world, of which there are a number of people volunteering to help Ukraine right now. And I think that's the critical thing, is that everyone's involved.
Well, Ukraine is trying to improve in every direction. It's really hard to do when you have Russia as a neighbor. In fact, looking at your biography retrospectively, it seems that military conditions and war is not something new for you. Were you afraid to be here when Russians attacked? Did you leave Kyiv? Did you leave the country? What have you experienced being here during the invasion?
No, well, to be honest, when they first invaded, they were coming down the south, and I was talking to friends at NATO and European Command, and they were convinced that the Russians would go down to Vinnytsia. And I thought, I didn't see how they'd get that far. But then they started coming in on the 26th, and I had already prearranged with other groups to leave if it became necessary. And those people wanted to leave, and my car turned out had a problem. So on the 26th, we decided to go down. I went down south just to get away from any possible encirclement, thinking any partisan warfare would start down south. And then after a couple of weeks down south, coordinating a lot of things, I moved to Lviv to check on some stuff there, and came back about a month ago to Kyiv. I came back mid-March.
When the explosions still were heard everywhere.
It was very empty when we got back, and the road back from Lviv was clear. Kyiv was still pretty empty, and guard posts were up everywhere. Still a lot of people scared at explosions during the day. even up until last week, where we were hearing small arms fire in the
Were
streets.
you scared?
Not really. I mean, I'm too old, you know, but nothing ever. The first 2 days of the war, there were explosions closer to my apartment, but ever since then, all the explosions have been far off. And you've heard small arms fire that might be 500 yards away, but you know, bullets are small, and I was far away, so I wasn't too worried about anything.
And we've got like intelligence reports that Russia was trying to get Ukraine in 2 days, or someone believed even like we stay independent, we stay sovereign. Of course, we fight Russians because the invasion is still here, the war is still in this country, but we did not give up. Did you expect this? Which scenario did you expect?
Well, it's interesting because the Russians did that helicopter assault on Gostomel, which I saw on the news that second day they did it, and I thought that's a really stupid idea. You know, who does that and who leaves themselves so exposed? You know, unless someone was involved in some collaborative way, which they weren't. It was just turned out to be a stupid move, just like the Ilyushin that tried to land south of Kyiv on the airfield there and got shot out of the sky. So the Russians tried some, you know, Hollywood-style approaches to take Kyiv, which were based on frankly, I think, stupid planning. So that kind of made me puzzle what the heck they were thinking. But having served with the Ukrainians in Iraq and having known them for 30 years, and seeing Maidan, I mean, Maidan, you know, the first night, my apartment was 200 yards off Maidan. The first night I went down there, you know, thinking, well, Ukrainians and night and cold, and I took vodka. They wouldn't let me on. They wouldn't let the vodka on. There's discipline that all of a sudden, you know, to a country that, you know, has issues that it needs to resolve. You know, that first night on Maidan, I was like, geez, it's a completely different style of life. You know, everyone was pitching in. Everyone was doing exactly what was needed. It was like, here's a country, a people that were born for warfare when it was necessary. Very peaceful when there's no need, and not instigating anything. But boy, when they are mad, they come together. And you saw it when this war started, and everyone came together. Everyone was fighting. People in my company with no military background are now on the front lines. The women in our company are organizing, you know, medical support and any kind of support. We got women going out and buying trucks to get to the front lines, which they need. So it's interesting to see how enthusiastically and stoically, you know, there's no fear in the Ukrainian mindset from what I see. It's just do what you need to be done. And yesterday I met with two guys from the Azov regiment. The day before, they'd been on the front lines down in Zaporizhia, and they were telling me about the mortar fire coming in. And they were talking about it like another businessman might talk about, you know, a contract they were signing the day before. It's just incredibly professional. You know, I don't know the Russians as well, but they've really met their match in this one.
You mentioned some comparison with the Hollywood style, right? When we talk about Russian technology, Russian weaponry, I've heard a lot that it is outdated. What do you say about Hollywood style of battle and then outdated technology?
A lot of Russia's strategy geopolitically has always been, and is more so now, disinformation. And so making the world fear them, even though it's baseless. Or, you know, they present new tanks which actually don't exist, or they brag about a new missile which actually doesn't exist. And so they've mentioned in the last 8 years these great reforms their military has done. And you don't reform a military culture of 300 years of gross incompetence, waste, and corruption in 8 years. And it's very evident that you don't do it now. You know, a lot of Western defense analysts were talking about this great reforms, and now it's a new modern army. Even before the war, I was looking at these reports, and I could not find any from any sources other than Russian generals. And if you're trusting Russian generals as your guide to the quality of the Russian army, you're going to be a little bit off. The only source I could find that wasn't a Russian general was when the Wagner Group, the private military company, attacked U.S. Special Forces in Syria. And they got totally obliterated. I mean, it was complete annihilation. It was bizarre that the Russians would even attack that way. But it was an indicator that they will attack in a what is a medieval or, you know, an early 20th century type of warfare at best. It's certainly not modern warfare what they've been doing. Now I have heard the weapons up that came to Kyiv, a lot of them were not as good. Some of the stuff up in Irpin and Bucha and Chernihiv may not have been good, and they might have some better stuff in the south. I don't know that that's accurate. They're certainly T-72s are much older than the T-80s and T-90s, but I think the problem is more not the equipment, because the Ukrainians don't have great equipment either, for the most part. But the Ukrainians have spirit and a common resolve. The Russians, I don't think they have that. You're going to see a tougher fight in the south because there is slightly better equipment. They're now more consolidated, but I don't think it's a war of attrition.
Well, looking at this description, it feels like Ukrainian army is doing really very well. From your understanding, how far are we from NATO standards, and what is the main challenge not to become a member these days when we have this full-scale invasion?
That's a great question. I would say man for man, soldier for soldier, at the tactical level, and tactical usually division level, but I would say below the battalion level, I would want to serve with Ukrainian soldiers alongside any soldier in the world. I think the issues that are going to confront Ukraine in joining NATO are at the ministry level and at the army level. Ukraine wants to be NATO. It's not, the troops are great. Those are NATO quality, and that's not a problem. They need more training and they need better individual equipment, but the soldiers themselves are first rate. But it's the processes and the transparency of the systems in the governance internally, historically, starting with before Yanukovych, and then even in the Poroshenko administration, you've got a lot of gray areas that need cleaning up. That NATO will say first-rate soldiers, but we need to be Ukraine needs to be transparent before we bring them on team.
But it's not only about the army; it's actually about Ukrainian people who try to get rid of Russian tanks without having weapons, who go unarmed against Russian soldiers to protest, against occupation. Are you surprised by this bravery of Ukrainian people?
I'm not too surprised. I mean, Maidan really showed me who the Ukrainian people are. And then I was in Ternopil and I was driving, and the guy driving me was telling me about his nieces, 15 and 14-year-old nieces, who were in Irpin on rooftops throwing Molotov cocktails down on armored vehicles. And that's, you don't get your average 14 or 15-year-old, in any other country, certainly not in the United States, willing to risk their lives to do that kind of thing. I'm not surprised that the Ukrainian people have stood up the way they have. When I was on Maidan, Americans, we have in history we used to learn about Valley Forge, where the revolutionaries spent a long, cold winter in order to prepare for the next year in 1777 against the British. And people talk about the suffering and the misery of that cold winter. As a proud American, I still can't help but think that the people on Maidan as good, if not far better than what was at Valley Forge. So I think the people of Ukraine are ready to lead the free world in terms of their attitude and approach. I think they're, as far as it relates to NATO, EU, there are governance standards in the government that need to be fixed, and hopefully with a complete separation from Russia, that will be all the more easier.
And a super difficult question as a politician. Which scenarios do you have in your head to see how this brutal Russian invasion is going to finish, and when?
I would say there will not be peace, and I mean real peace, until three things happen, and that's Putin is gone, the Russian security state is dismantled, and Russia is denuclearized. If any of those three things remain, you have a very problematic neighbor they might sign a ceasefire, and they might sign a long-term ceasefire, but they will continue to act like the mafia state that they are, always trying to find some way to exploit their people for further, material gain. I don't see those happening. I don't know. You could see scenarios where those happen fairly quickly, though not easily. I think a ceasefire in the near future after May 9th, and Putin declaring victory, because if he's able to get Mariupol and he's able to create his land bridge, which is somewhat worthless in my opinion at this stage, he can declare victory and then withdraw, and then you have a frozen conflict in the south until Ukraine is in a position to counterattack and take the land back. And I hope that if that happens, that Ukraine does not enter a prolonged ceasefire, but in fact gets NATO to give them the weapons to counterattack, because this is the time to do it when Russia is in a weak state, rather than in the future. Once the lines are solidified, I think you'll have a prolonged ceasefire the way we've had in Donbass, and that I don't think that doesn't work very well for Ukraine. And I think Putin needs to lose this. Putin needs to go, but he needs to lose this. And I think Ukraine needs to get the West to get them the weapons to allow them to win and take back what is theirs.
Well, Andy, thank you for sharing with the KyivPost your insights and your deep analysis and details of what you've seen here. We were talking to Andy Bain, a long-time businessman based in Kyiv, but who is an American and the head of the Ukrainian Freedom Fund. Thank you for being with us.